Good morning, everybody. So I didn't do it yesterday because I was getting my ass beat in CrossFit. Like I'm in a new city, I'm trying to figure out, what CrossFit gym to go to. So I didn't get a chance to post yesterday. I was in pain, but it has just given me enough time to think about what I was going to talk about today and just concentrate the message a lot more. So one of the things that I was talking about was trauma bonding in college. And like I said, everything is cyclical. Like I'll always say, we manifest in our lives. We manifest things that were given to us at an early age. So I would dare say anything that had come into my life prior to 33 years old, I manifested it through a place of trauma. That's what I'll definitely say. I manifested a lot of the things in my life through trauma. And what has happened is that, I went to Morehouse from a place of trauma. I grew up in a household where I needed to feel sufficient intellectually. So I went to a school that was brutally intellectually. And I made it through that school, but it didn't mean that I didn't come away from that school with bumps, bruises, or scars from the experience. In fact, I would dare say with Morehouse, my scars and my bruises, I really didn't acknowledge them as much because it was a different type of trauma. It was not like the previous traumas that I had gone through when I was in, you know, formal education, secondary education before college. Now, for graduate school, I will say that USC was a very racist environment for me. USC was extremely racist. And this was also a manifestation of me coming from a traumatic place. So I think that when I chose USC, the heart of it is being black and understanding that, we have to work twice as hard compared to any other group of people to get half, if any, of what they have. So that is the energy I was flowing in. I really did not choose USC as a first. It was not my first choice. My first choice was to go to Clark Atlanta University, Clark Atlanta University, and go to the School of Social Work there. I was there for a year, and I saw the caliber of students that they brought in. And this is not a knock against Clark Atlanta, but it's a knock against, the white power structure and people who go to PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and then they want to try to recapture, a historically black college experience that they didn't have. So I came from an HBCU. I was still at an HBCU, but the black people that were in the school, for the most part, didn't go through an undergraduate experience of blackness. So it was very much so a convoluted place. So I was like, I might as well go to a PWI if this is what this is. So USC was a school that I entered 1 year after I did not transfer any credits from Clark into USC. And the chances were at that time, USC was not going to accept any credits from Clark anyway because of racial bias. But what ended up happening with me was I had gone to school, and I remember an Asian professor, a Southeast Asian professor, which they're known as the lower ones. I don't want to say the term, but they're considered low on the Asian platform. They're not considered model minority. They're considered really um, untouchable, And I'm taking that from the Hindu understanding. I know that, but I'm just using that to not to say what a lot of people say about Southeast Asians. Now, this professor accused me of plagiarism, and he, when he graded my paper, I'll never forget. He said, "Pay attention to my class, no matter how smart you think you are," and he put this on my paper. And he failed me. I think for the first two or three tests in his class. Now, I'm well read, well studied, and all of a sudden, this professor is failing me. There are people in this class who are not nearly as intellectual as I am who are passing his class, right? And I had to fight for myself because my thing was I was going to lose a scholarship based on the fact that he thought I plagiarized the paper, based on the fact that he had an issue with the way that I looked. And not just from a place of my skin color, but the fact that I'm actually very stocky, so I'm very built. So I didn't understand this, and I had a friend point that out. She was like, "No, Gabriel, it's the way that you look, and it's not just the fact that you black. It's the way that you come into a room." And she asked about that. So that was one of the issues. I had another issue with professors who, worked against me. They were not trying to see me as smart. I saw a white girl in my class who basically said nothing, get 100 on a paper, and when it came time to discuss issues in class, she was moot. She had nothing to say. She was just like, no, and did not have half the caliber of intelligence that I brought to the table. Then I have to deal with the fact that there are black professors who work for the institution who will work against other black students. Okay, I had to deal with that. There are two professors that come to mind when that happened. Then I had a feminist, a white feminist, basically try to get me kicked out of school. So the entire experience of being at a predominantly white institution was horrible. That's not even the half of it. As she tried to get me kicked out of school, the reason she wanted to get me kicked out of school was to blame me for having male privilege. Now let's explore male privilege. Okay, I understand that male privilege exists, but there are levels to this shit. Okay, I am a black man. I do not sit at the same table as white men. White men do not allow black men to live in their full masculinity. That's a whole nother clip for another time, but I'm going to say that I do not have the same kind of leniency as someone who is Asian American or Asian because they fall into that model minority status, right? They're non threatening. Um, I am Afro Latino, but I'm not, of a white complexion. You know what I'm saying? So you don't get that either. Um, and I'm definitely not white. So I'm going to be up against some obstacles with this whole male privilege thing. And this is a white girl who was completely oblivious and had a level of cognitive dissonance that is beyond me. But she tried to get me kicked out of school. Her and another white girl tried to get me kicked out of school. I had to fight USC for about a year because they kept coming up with tactics to try to get me kicked out of school based on the fact that, how I was academically. And keep in mind, academic speech is free speech. So literally, you could say that the school was fighting against my constitutional right. And they literally did this. And I had to call the entire school under the carpet. And change was done, change was made as a result. So, this is the reality of what happens when you're a black student at a majority institution. What I learned was that there were black students who had nothing but predominantly white colleges, or USC was the only college that they had ever gone to, and they had no voice. For me, I was blessed in the fact that I did go to Morehouse. Now, granted, Morehouse was traumatic, but one thing I can say about Morehouse was I walked away from the experience knowing how to fight. And I believe that any black student who goes to any predominantly white institution needs to know how to fight because they're not going to give you those tools. White people will provide the capital, they will provide the access as much as they will allow for you to probably get through school. Now, with a predominantly black institution, a historically black institution, what you get is a nurturing, what you get is an understanding of the system, and it is harsh and it is cruel, and you must be diligent. And that was what made me get through USC was that Morehouse experience, even though it was traumatic as hell when I could go back to some of the events that happened to me. But at the end of the day, I think what was very good about it was I was able to bring about change at the school. I was able to make policy changes within the student handbook. I was able to get the school to basically pay my tuition. Because of all the racist stuff that I had gone through, USC had actually kept me back for a year and a semester based on the antics of the school and people going unchecked. And I believe it was a very beautiful karmic balance because at the end of the day, the school actually got hit with a lot of things. There was like people indicted, there were people fired, there were things that were done institutionally to make sure that this did not happen again. And I think at the end of the day, it's important that not only are you fixing a traumatic issue for yourself, especially in a space like that, but you make sure that it doesn't happen to another student that follows you. Because what they had been able to do with me at USC, they had been able to do to people for years. And that's the truth of the matter. But I think essentially, I felt something rumble like a earthquake, but that's why I look back. But um, essentially, at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want to kind of pave the pathway better for another person. You don't want to be the one that it stops on you, and because you didn't fix it, somebody else now has to experience what you could have taken care of. And I'm going to wrap this up and just say that there were a lot of people, especially students who look like me, who were afraid, and they were not going to call out the institution. They just weren't. And there's just like that's a level of oppression that we as black people still deal with today. Is that when we should speak up, we don't speak up because we're thinking about the entrapment of the economic things that happen. You know, what's going to happen to me now? Well, you probably are not getting paid what you want to get paid anyway. And if you attended a school like USC, you weren't meant to go and work for anybody. You were meant to create. So I took from the experience. But on that note, everybody have a good one. I will come back and talk about military experience next because that's just the way I feel about it. Peace now.